She sat perfectly still on the train bench, hands trembling under white gloves, her hat pulled low over her eyes. To anyone watching, she was just a sickly young white gentleman traveling with his quiet slave. No one could suspect the truth, because she wasn't a man, and she wasn't white. She was Ellen Craft, a light-skinned black woman born into slavery. And the man by her side, the one pretending to serve her, was her husband, William. This was their only chance at freedom. One slip, one wrong word, and they'd be dragged off the train in chains. Or worse. But this story didn't begin on a train. It began years earlier, on a Georgia plantation, where freedom was a dream, and love was a dangerous secret. Ellen was born into slavery, but not like most others. Her skin was nearly white, her features delicate, European. She was the illegitimate daughter of her enslaved mother, and the white man who owned them both. She was a child of two worlds, but accepted by neither. As a young girl, she was gifted away to her half-sister as a wedding present. A human gift. That's how the world saw her, property. In that house, in that twisted system, she learned to keep quiet, to keep her head down. But deep inside, a fire burned, a knowing that she was meant for more than this. Years later, Ellen met William Craft, another enslaved worker. Smart, strong, and fiercely determined. He was a carpenter, skilled with his hands, with a mind always calculating. Their connection was instant. In a world where families were torn apart and love was punished, Ellen and William found something rare, someone to believe in. But love between slaves was a cruel gamble. You could be sold away at any moment. You could lose everything. Still, they married. Not legally. The law didn't recognize black love, but in their hearts, it was sacred. They dreamed of a future where they could wake up free, live without fear, raise children who weren't born into chains. And slowly, that dream turned into a plan. A desperate, brilliant plan. Because Ellen looked white enough to pass. And William, he would act as her servant. They would flip the system on its head, pretend to be what they were not, and escape through the very world that enslaved them. It was dangerous. It was bold. It was nearly impossible. But they had nothing to lose, and everything to gain. So on the morning of December 24th, 1848, they stepped out onto the train platform. Ellen's hair was tucked under a tall hat. Bandages covered her face to hide her features and explain why Master couldn't speak much. She wore men's clothes, carried a cane. Her body shook with every step. And William walked 2 paces behind her, eyes low, hands ready. They were just another master and slave. That's what people thought. But inside their hearts, thunder. The train hissed. Conductors shouted. Strangers stared. But no one stopped them. They climbed aboard. And so began their 4-day escape, across hundreds of miles, through slave states, across hostile borders, into cities filled with danger. They sat side by side, silent, pretending, praying, because behind the disguise was the greatest truth of all. 2 human beings, desperate to be free. The train rattled over the tracks, each clatter a reminder of how close they were to death. William kept his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He couldn't look up. Not too much, not too long. A slave didn't do that. Ellen sat stiff beside him, her heart pounding. She dared not speak. She was supposed to be deaf and sick. That was the story. Her disguise wasn't just clothing, it was silence. One wrong sound could tear it all apart. At the first stop, a conductor approached. "Sir," he said, tipping his hat, "need help with your servant?" Ellen nodded weakly, never speaking. William held his breath. The conductor smiled politely and moved on. Their gamble had worked, for now. Each stop, each stare, each polite southern smile was a test. Behind every sir and ma'am was suspicion. Behind every door was the threat of being exposed. But they pressed on. On the second day, they boarded a steamer headed north. The air was colder now, but not enough to calm the fire of fear in their chests. A well-dressed gentleman struck up, a conversation with Ellen, curious about his travels. Ellen fumbled her answers, nodding more than speaking. She motioned to her throat, pretending illness. William stood by silently, playing the role of loyal servant. The man seemed satisfied and moved on. But inside, Ellen felt her stomach twist. Every conversation was a minefield. Every compliment, every casual question, another inch closer to discovery. They reached Charleston, South Carolina, deep in slave territory. The city was crawling with eyes, overseers, guards, bounty hunters. They found an inn, and Ellen checked in under the name Mr. Johnson. As they entered the room and the door clicked shut behind them, Ellen collapsed onto the bed, shaking. William knelt beside her, holding her hand tight. They didn't speak. They couldn't. But their silence said everything. We're still alive. That night, William paced the room while Ellen lay still, too afraid to sleep. She remembered her mother's voice, the sound of chains, the screams from the slave quarters when someone was whipped. She remembered watching white families dine in peace while black children her. Age scrubbed the floors beneath them. And now, here she was pretending to be one of them, a white man, respected, obeyed. The irony was cruel. The disguise was heavy, but it was working. Just a few more days, just a few more lies. By the third morning, they were on another train, this one taking them closer to the border. The Mason-Dixon line, the invisible line between slavery and freedom. But lines on a map meant nothing if you didn't live to cross them. In Baltimore, things nearly unraveled. They entered a hotel, exhausted. The clerk looked at Ellen, at the bandages, the gloves, the stiff posture. His brow furrowed. "Traveling alone, sir?" Ellen motioned to her throat, nodded. "Can I see your papers?" The clerk asked, narrowing his eyes. Ellen froze. Her heart nearly stopped. She fumbled in her coat, pulling out the forged documents William had risked everything to create. The man scanned them slowly. Too slowly. William could feel the blood drain from his face. Any moment now, the man would call for help. "Call for backup." Then, a pause, a nod. "Very well, sir," the clerk said. "Enjoy your stay." They were safe. Again. Just barely. Back in the room, Ellen wept. William didn't try to stop her. They were so close. Just one more day, one more train, one more lie. And then, maybe, just maybe, they could breathe. Morning came heavy with fog, and with it, their final chance. This was it, the last leg of the journey. One more train, one more ride through enemy territory. If they made it across this final stretch, they would reach Philadelphia. They would reach freedom. Ellen's hands were ice cold as she stepped onto the platform. Her limbs ached from days of tight posture, heavy fabric, and unrelenting fear. William walked behind her, eyes as tired as hers, but fire still burning underneath. They took their seats silently, as always. Ellen folded her hands. William looked down. The train lurched forward. Outside the window, trees blurred past, snow dusted the ground, and time slowed. Inside the cabin, Ellen's thoughts raced. What if someone recognized her? What if the papers were wrong? What if they reached the border and still weren't safe? She wanted to breathe but couldn't, not yet. Then it happened. A fellow passenger, an older gentleman, leaned over, friendly, curious. "Traveling far, sir?" he asked Ellen. She nodded lightly, her voice catching in her throat. She forced a hoarse whisper, barely audible. "Philadelphia!" The man smiled. "Fine city. Hope your servant is well trained." William tensed but didn't move. Didn't speak. "Yes," Ellen croaked. "He is." The man nodded approvingly and turned away. It was the first time Ellen had spoken to a white man as an equal. The weight of it almost broke her. Hours passed. The train roared forward. The air grew colder. And then, the conductor shouted, "Next stop, Philadelphia!" William looked up. His eyes met Ellen's. Neither said a word. They couldn't, not yet. The train hissed as it pulled into the station. Passengers rose. Luggage thudded. Boots scuffed the floorboards. And then they stepped off. The wind hit their faces like a slap. The crowd bustled around them. No one stopped them. No one questioned them. No one chased them. They were here free. The streets of Philadelphia had never seen two travelers like them. Ellen and William Craft, a couple who had dressed themselves in lies, walked through fire and crossed an entire country just to hold each other, without chains. They walked quickly, still cautious, still glancing over their shoulders. But the truth was setting in. They had made it. Not by chance, not by luck, by courage, by love, by outsmarting a system built to break them. And though the city welcomed them, their journey was far from over. Because even in the north, the claws of slavery could reach. Slave catchers, hired guns, Southern agents, they all hunted runaways. But Ellen and William were done running. They would fight. They would speak. They would turn their survival into a revolution. The city lights of Philadelphia flickered like stars against the cold night sky. But Ellen and William didn't stop to admire them. They found shelter with local abolitionists, people who had dedicated their lives to helping the hunted, the hated, the free but still fleeing. Here they were no longer pretending. Here Ellen could breathe without disguise. William could look a man in the eye without fear. But freedom was fragile. News of their escape spread fast, too fast. Southern newspapers called it a national scandal. Slaveholders in Georgia were humiliated, furious. Their property had outwitted them. And now they wanted them back. Under the newly passed Fugitive Slave Act, slave catchers had the legal right to drag runaway slaves back to the South, even from free states, even from Philadelphia. The crafts became high-profile targets. Men were paid to follow them, to watch them, to wait for the right moment. Ellen and William had escaped slavery, but they had not escaped danger. So once again, they packed their few belongings, and once again, they ran. This time across the ocean, to England. It was there, thousands of miles from the plantations that had tried to crush them, that they finally found peace. And they didn't hide. No, they stood tall. They spoke at public halls, universities, and churches, told their story again and again. William's voice thundered with truth. Ellen's quiet strength captivated every room she entered. They didn't just tell what they escaped from. They told what they dreamed of. A world where love wasn't illegal. A world where skin didn't define your soul. A world where children weren't born in chains. They lived in England for nearly 2 decades, raised 5 children, educated them freely, published their story, a book titled Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom. It became a symbol of resistance, of defiance, of hope. And when the Civil War ended and slavery was finally abolished in America, they came home. But not to rest. They came back to rebuild. In Georgia, the very soil where they were once enslaved, they opened a school for black children. Children who had never known chains but were still weighed down by the legacy of them. Ellen taught them dignity. William taught them strength. And together, they showed them that freedom was more than escape. It was creation. They didn't just survive history. They changed it. Years passed. The crafts grew older. Their names no longer whispered in fear, but spoken with reverence. They had outlived the system that tried to erase them. But more than that, they had built something lasting. A life of dignity, a family born free, a legacy that could not be chained. Their story, though once buried, would not die. Because it wasn't just about 2 people escaping slavery. It was about 2 souls rewriting the rules. About love-defying power. About a woman who pretended to be the very thing that oppressed her and used it to walk into freedom. Ellen Craft didn't carry a weapon. She didn't lead an army. But what she did took more courage than most soldiers ever find. And William, standing beside her, protecting her, believing in her, was proof that strength isn't loud. It's loyal. Today we remember many names from history, but somehow, not theirs. And that should change, because Ellen and William Craft didn't just make it out, they lit a path. A path built on silence and strategy, risk and resistance, love and survival. If their story moved you, don't let it fade again. Tell someone. Share their names. Because history isn't just what happened. It's what we choose to remember. And some stories, like Ellen and William's, were never meant to be forgotten.